instead of teaching children in schools high rigor academics so that they could be independent, successful people, they were teaching them a certain brand of politics. And it wasn't here is the left, here's the right, and then let them make the decision. It was here is the woke ideology. Here is one side and the other side is bad. And when you do that, children will naturally grow up, of course, to vote one way. And that's what happened in California, is everybody laughs at California about how did they get that way? Well, they got that way because they were indoctrinating the children to vote only one way and to vote no matter, even if it's to their own demise. So when I saw the same thing in Indiana, I saw the same seeds being planted. It was like watching the same movie again, except I knew the ending. And I think at that moment, when I realized that, I realized there was really nowhere to run. You know, my great-grandfather ran from communist China when he was already an older man. That's how, you know, my father got here, and that's how my siblings and I were born here. Now, moving from California to Indiana is nowhere near as dramatic. Obviously, we're very lucky to still live in this country. But I realized that there's nowhere for my children or anybody's children to run. There's nowhere to go. As I always allude to, that nobody's escaping the United States to go to Cuba in the middle of the night. So I realized that if I didn't try to at least do something, even in the most tiniest form, that I can't complain. And I have nothing to complain about because I grew up in a time where I might be able to do something about it, even if it's just a couple of parents at a time.
20 years ago, there wasn't as close a tie between, you know, voting for the Democratic Party and, say, you know, woke ideology.
Right.
Right. And by no means is it, you know, kind of a one-to-one thing even today or anything like that. Even it's definitely much more prevalent.
Sure.
But like, why? So it was voting that you noticed, or was the ideology that you noticed, or both, and they're always tied together, or what do you mean by that?
It was a lot of young people having opinions and thoughts that, when questioned, they fall back to a lot of rhetoric and a lot of slogans. So one of the things in California is the whole illegal immigration. They've convinced generations of people that letting floods and floods of illegal aliens coming into the state has no impact on your finances or your safety or anything. No matter what facts, no matter how, you know, the kind of statistics you show them, it doesn't matter. They just go, no humans illegal. And growing up there, it's, you know, fish don't know they're wet, right? When you're growing up there, you have no idea because you grew up, you know, I grew up there. And then when you start having kids and things of that nature, and you're trying to build businesses and things like that, you start to go, why is it like this here in California? And then you start traveling. The thing about people in California, they don't travel very much. That's the funny thing. They just stay around California. And when you start traveling to other parts of the country, you start to realize that that's not, why is this state using their tax dollars so well? They don't have any of the GDP of California, but yet their roads are better, their infrastructure is better, this is better, that's better, schools are better, their safety is better. Why is that? And then that's what started kind of working backwards.
Okay, I understand. And then you decided, I'm going to get out, I'm going to go to Indiana. You realized now that there's, you know, there's, as you say, there's nowhere else to go. So you kind of got busy doing something. And so it was like, okay, I must make educational materials that everyone can understand. So how did that happen?
Well, you know, I had a small nonprofit in Indiana focused on a very local level. You know, I live in a very nice city called Carmel, Indiana. And even then, the school board and the schools they already have these ideologies in there. The transgender ideology, the critical race theory, they have porns in schools. The superintendent straight up lie and say, no, I don't think we do. And we present it to them in school board, read it out loud, same thing. And this is in a really nice, affluent, you know, place. But then I also realized that it's something that's been is going to blanket the whole entire country, and it's not a red state, blue state thing. And to be fair, it's not even a Democrat-Republican thing. It really isn't.
Right.
It's really just this attack on children's innocence. It's a complete attack on separating children from families, and we can talk a little bit about how they're doing that and some of my tools and explaining that, but really that's really what it is. My great-grandfather ran from communism. The people that dragged him out of his little bakery shop and beat him weren't soldiers. They were college kids, the Red Guard. And I see that that's what they're creating now with a lot of these kids. It's this revolutionist, and to hate America, to hate American values, and to drive a wedge between the family, and you have to drive a wedge between the parents and children first before you can get them to be revolutionists. That's throughout history. That's always the playbook. That has to be the first step.
So how is that wedge being driven?
In K through 12 today, the way they're driving that wedge is using both race and gender, but it's coming through a mental health program called social emotional learning. And it sounds really great. They use terms that all parents love, like empathy and personal responsibility, or responsible decision making. All those things sound great. But they're doing what we call language contamination. So for example, empathy. You and I, and probably everybody watching, all the just normal people watching, we kind of generally know what empathy is. What the schools today, what social emotional learning, when they bring it in, what they mean is, today, when a little girl's in a restroom or locker room, if a boy walks in, changing next to them, now they have to have empathy. So they're not using empathy, they're weaponizing kindness, and they're weaponizing empathy. So they're not using it in a way that we think. Now school counselors, and we did a big expose on school counselors and social workers, they're redefining two words, safe and abuse. We always believe that safe, or if a child's unsafe, is because they're being neglected at home, beaten, starved, that kind of thing. Today, they're not safe if you don't succumb to the transgender ideology. You don't use their pronouns. You don't let them have breast binders. You don't let them take puberty blockers. Then the schools are like, the parents are unsafe. They're causing the suicide. They're neglectful and abusive. And now, but we're the safe space. And what's interesting is that if you redefine a term, you don't have to change the laws. You just expand on that existing law to be able to separate the kids from their families, which is why we see a lot of these stories now becoming more and more prevalent across the country. Like in Maine, there was a social worker that gave a breast binder to a 13-year-old. You have one in Wisconsin where they're transitioning a minor against their parents, and there's a lawsuit there. So on and on, you're seeing that, and it's happening due to mostly the counselors and the social workers, and it's coming through the mental health program, social emotional learning. So, I mean, we can go into more detail, but in a nutshell, that's how they're using to separate the kids from their family by sexualizing kids early, and then when the parents disagree, because what parents wouldn't disagree with this, they use that to say they're unsafe and they're abusive.
Well, because of course, there are parents who are abusive.
Right.
And there are parents who create unsafe situations at home.
That's right.
It's just that basically what you're saying is that the concept of that now has been redefined to include people who have, are trying to instill a loving home.
Right.
But because it doesn't fit with the gender or race ideology specifically, now they're the abusers.
That's right. It would be like, let's say there are parents that goes, I don't ever feed my child fast food. Everything has to be freshly made. Okay, great. But imagine if those parents, which is great, if they went to school and they wrote the policy and they said, if you feed your child McDonald's, you're abusive. The problem is with social emotional learning and all these really arrogant teachers and school board members and school and counselors and social workers, they believe they know better. They know better. They want to push their idea of what good parenting is onto everybody else. But that's not what a government entity is supposed to do. This is a public school. If they are truly abusive, we already have programs existing that protects those kids. Is it a perfect system? No, of course not. We see a lot of these terrible stories where the system does miss it. But the answer isn't to do a blanket-wide program in the schools and say all parents are abusive and to continue to expand on that. That's how you separate children from their parents.